Hello friends, my name is Nick and this week's plant of the week is Philodendron squamiferum, commonly referred to as the red bristle philodendron or the red stem philodendron. I feel like there's a myriad of common names for this houseplant that includes that cluster of words. But you can see this gets its common name from these interesting red petioles that this houseplant has that are very vibrant, particularly on the newer growth. You can see on the lower growth, like down here on this leaf that's probably going a little off camera, that it does kind of lose its color a little bit, but you can just see how vibrant it is on the newer leaves. This is the newest leaf right here. You can see it's still a little floppy around the edges. This isn't like a fuzzy, like soft plants that you're probably used to. This is more like the stem or the petiole is like expelling plant material. It just kind of feels like that. It reminds me of those like Play-Doh toys, the haircut toys, where you like push it up and then the Play-Doh hair comes out. That is the best way to describe the petioles of this plant. It's really interesting. And I really wanted to talk about this one today because it used to be a houseplant that was pretty difficult to get your hands on. I mean, a lot of philodendrons are pretty difficult to get your hands on in today's climate, but this one, I believe, is one of the newest additions to the like trending tropicals by Costa Farms that you find in like all the big box stores. So you can probably walk into your local hardware store, big box store, and probably find one of these days. So that's pretty exciting. What was once a over $100 plant more than likely is now like $15 to $25. So I think that's pretty cool. So figured why not share with all you guys who are getting a new Philodendron squamiferum how to care for it. I've been growing this plant for probably just like 2, maybe going on 3 years. And it's proven to be a really easy philodendron to grow, which is great because I know that this is like a species philodendron in comparison to many of like the hybrid varieties that are cultivated to be better to grow in the home, while this is just like the species version, so there's really nothing done to it. So I've known some species philodendrons to be a little bit more difficult to care for, but this one honestly has been very, very easy to grow. In fact, this plant right here, this is 2 cuttings that I took off of another plant that I have in my home, which that one just put off a big, beautiful leaf, but this was the one that's not attached to a trellis. So this is the one I had to talk about today, but ridiculous easy to grow, ridiculously easy to propagate, so it's a win-win in my book. For the lighting for this house plant, you are going to subject this to pretty much just that standard philodendron lighting. If you grow any other philodendrons in your home, you are on the right track with your Philodendron squamiferum. These thrive in like the bright indirect areas of your home. So if we're talking about window directions in the northern hemisphere, north-facing windows would be great. Maybe a couple feet away or near an east or west-facing window would also be great. Maybe like 4 to 6 feet away from a south-facing window. Of course, all this depends on how well exposed your window is. A south-facing window facing right up against a brick wall isn't going to have the best exposure regardless of being a south-facing window, so just some things to bear in mind there. But no direct sunlight. These green glossy leaves would scorch and burn, and they will not come back after they scorch and burn. This is a houseplant that grows in like the understory of the rainforest. I think it's native to like Brazil and like Suriname and like French Guiana, so it's definitely one that's like creeping along the forest floor and then climbing up trees. And the leaves will mature a little bit more. They'll get some more definition to their leaves. You can see some of the younger ones, like this one back here, has much less definition, but as it's starting to feel itself a little bit more, it gets a little bit more of the characteristics that the leaves have. That is another gimmicky part of this houseplant beyond just the red stems, because this leaf shape really is to die for. Definitely one of my favorite leaf shapes, and I'm sure if I've done any top 10 or my favorite houseplant videos in the past year or 2, this would definitely have made the cut because I feel very strongly about my Philodendron squamiferum, particularly this leaf shape, but the red petioles do kind of put it over the top. Watering is also pretty straightforward with this houseplant. I'm just watering this when I'm making my weekly rounds with the watering can, so probably just watering this once a week. This one I have in a terracotta planter. My other one I have in a ceramic planter, so every once in a while I do find myself watering this one a little bit more, of course, because terracotta or unglazed ceramic is going to pull moisture out from the soil versus the ceramic one's going to hold on to it. So you can use your best judgment there, but roughly once a week has been really working for me. And the soil, I'd use just my standard aeroid mix, a peat or coconut quartz base mix with a good amount of perlite and orchid bark. If hopefully you can see, I know you're a little far away, and there's also this moss pole and giant leaves is covering what we got going on here, but there is a decent amount of perlite and bark in here, probably a little bit of charcoal as well, as I pretty often just like throw in a scoop into my aeroid mixes just to keep things clean and aerated. These are toxic to pets. My cat doesn't chew on my plants, so that's not something I worry about, but these are moderately toxic. I wouldn't consider them fatal. I wouldn't expect if your pet took a bite out of this plant that it would involve going to the vet, but their mouth might swell up a little bit or it might upset their tummy. But I would just keep that in mind and keep this out of reach from your pets. Propagating this houseplant is also pretty easy. I think I mentioned that I propagated this one from the mother plant that I had before because that one was just getting too tall. When that happens in my home, I just cut it back, start a new one, and I can get a couple cuttings going after a little while, and then I have a nice full pot like I have right here. So that's kind of what I like to do when I bring a new philodendron in my home and it starts to grow a little bit too much, which isn't always nice when it happens. But to propagate it, you're just going to propagate it like you do like any standard pothos or philodendron. All of the nodes, or where the petioles meet the stem along the main stem of the plant, have all these root nublets, and if you cut in between two nodes and just submerge it in water, or you could put it in like some sphagnum moss. You could put it directly in soil, but I would really only do that if you are keeping it inside a terrarium or if you're working with a greenhouse. I wouldn't just plant a cutting in soil and just leave it out in the standard environment of our homes. That is probably a 50% chance of survival. I'm sure it can make it. I've done it plenty of times before, but for a houseplant like this, especially one that wasn't hybridized to grow inside the home, I would definitely give it a little bit more attention when propagating it. Speaking of the humidity, humidity would be a great thing to supply for this plant. Like I keep saying, this was not hybridized to grow inside the home, so it does prefer some higher humidities, but as I've been growing this one in my home for a couple years now, I feel like it's totally acclimated to just the humidity that I have inside my home. It doesn't seem to have any issues with it, but I could imagine this being one that might suffer a little bit when first bringing it home from the garden center where it came from the greenhouse where it's been growing in prime conditions. So just something to kind of keep in mind there. Temperature-wise, this can handle downwards of like 50 degrees, which is pretty low for a houseplant, and upwards of like 80 degrees, so standard household temperature is fine. You can even grow this outside in many environments in the spring and summer months. If you live in a really hot and dry environment, I would avoid that, as you know, this grows in the rainforest in its natural habitat, so you can just use your best judgment there. But I could see this growing very, very well outside in like my area of the United States, Philadelphia, in the spring and summertime, and probably grow double the amount that it would grow inside. But this is just one of my favorite houseplants. I really was excited to talk about it, especially now that it's becoming a little bit more of a more prevalent houseplant. Super interesting. There's a lot of love about it, but not just the leaf shape, but the red petioles. Given that also it's a climbing houseplant, you can see I have a moss pole in here, which this vine right here is kind of just working its way away and kind of doing its own thing. But this other vine is kind of working with the moss pole here and using it to its advantage. Although this one does seem to be the more vigorous vine, so I don't really know the science behind that, but anyway, it is smart to give your climbing philodendrons, Philodendron squamiferum in this case, a moss pole or a trellis or some kind of support, even if it's just a wood stake that you're holding it up with, because as this grows a little bit taller, it will start to fall down and vine, and they usually grow their best when they're climbing up something, as that's how they grow in their natural habitat, so that's how you're going to get the most maturity to your leaves. So also another little tip for you guys. So thank you so much for joining me today. This week's plant of the week, Philodendron squamiferum, the red bristle philodendron, or probably many other names involving red, bristle, stemmed, and all of those words. So thanks again for joining me. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at phillyfoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.